Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is praying for a stock market crash. Not because they want chaos, not because they enjoy watching retirement accounts evaporate, but because they understand something that most people never will. Economic disasters are wealth transfer events disguised as tragedies. The money doesn't disappear during a crash, it moves. And over the next few minutes, you're going to learn exactly where it goes. You'll also learn why the same patterns repeat every single time, and how ordinary people position themselves to catch what the panicking masses throw away. Here's a number that should make you uncomfortable. After every major economic downturn in modern history, the number of millionaires actually increases within 3 to 5 years. Not decreases, increases. That sounds counterintuitive, almost offensive when you think about all the people who lose their homes and jobs during these periods. But the data doesn't lie, and once you understand the mechanics behind this phenomenon, you'll never look at a recession the same way again. Let's start with what actually happens when markets collapse. Most people imagine money being destroyed, like it's literally burning in some metaphorical fire, but that's not how economics works. When stock prices fall, the money that was invested doesn't vanish into thin air. What changes is the perceived value of assets. Think of it like this. If you bought a house for $500,000 and suddenly the market crashes, and now it's worth $300,000, you haven't lost $200,000 in cash. You've lost $200,000 in paper value. The house is still there. The bricks haven't changed. What changed is what someone else is willing to pay for it right now. This distinction matters enormously, because while most people see falling prices as losses, a certain subset of the population sees them as discounts, and that difference in perspective is worth billions of dollars every single cycle. Warren Buffett has this famous quote that gets thrown around so much it's practically a cliche at this point. Be fearful when others are greedy, and greedy when others are fearful. Everyone nods along when they hear it. Very few people actually do it. And the reason is psychological, not intellectual. When markets are crashing, the news is terrifying. Headlines scream about economic collapse. Your neighbor just got laid off. Your own job feels uncertain. Every instinct in your body tells you to protect what you have, to sell before things get worse, to run for safety. That's not stupidity. That's evolution. Humans are hardwired to avoid losses more than they're motivated to seek gains. Psychologists call this loss aversion, and it's one of the most powerful forces in human decision-making. Meanwhile, the people who end up becoming millionaires during these periods are doing something that feels almost reckless to outside observers. They're buying. They're taking cash they've kept on the sidelines and deploying it into assets that are selling at historically low prices. They're not smarter than everyone else in some fundamental way. They've just trained themselves to override the panic response, or they've built systems that remove emotion from the equation entirely. Consider what assets typically crash the hardest during economic downturns. Stocks, obviously, real estate, small businesses, high-yield bonds. These are all things that generate income or appreciate over time. When the economy recovers, and it always does eventually, these assets don't just return to their previous values. They often exceed them. Someone who bought quality stocks at the bottom of a crash might see their portfolio double or triple within a few years. Someone who bought foreclosed properties might end up with rental income that funds their entire lifestyle. The math is simple. The execution is emotionally brutal. But here's where things get interesting. The new millionaires created during crashes aren't just people who happen to have cash lying around. Many of them are people who positioned themselves strategically before the downturn even happened. They maintained liquidity, which just means having access to cash or easily sellable assets, even when everyone else was fully invested. They avoided debt that would force them to sell at the worst possible time. They built skills that remain valuable regardless of economic conditions. In other words, they prepared for an opportunity they knew would eventually come, even if they didn't know exactly when. This is fundamentally different from how most people manage their finances. The average person is fully invested during good times because optimism feels rational when everything is going up. They might even take on extra debt to buy more house than they need or invest on margin to amplify their gains. This works beautifully during bull markets. It's absolutely devastating during crashes. When the downturn hits, they're forced to sell assets at depressed prices just to meet their obligations. They become involuntary sellers at precisely the moment when they should be buyers. The wealth transfer happens in that moment. Money flows from people who must sell to people who can buy. It's not complicated. It's not a conspiracy. It's just the mathematical result of different financial positions and different psychological responses to fear. Now, some people hear this and think it sounds predatory. And look, there's a legitimate ethical debate to be had about people profiting from others' misfortune. But consider the alternative perspective. When someone buys a foreclosed home, they're providing liquidity to a bank that needs to clear bad assets off its books, which helps stabilize the financial system. When someone buys stock during a panic, they're providing capital to companies that might otherwise have to lay off workers. When someone acquires a struggling small business, they often save jobs that would otherwise disappear. The people buying during crashes aren't causing the crashes. They're helping end them by putting floors under asset prices and preventing complete economic freefall. What makes this cycle so predictable is that human psychology doesn't change. Every generation thinks their crash is different, that this time the fundamentals have permanently shifted, that recovery won't happen like it did before. The dot-com bubble felt like the death of the internet economy. The housing crisis felt like the end of American home ownership. The pandemic crash felt like civilization itself was ending. And yet, within a few years of each event, markets recovered, economies grew, and the people who bought at the bottom found themselves wealthy beyond what they'd imagined. The pattern is so reliable that some investors don't even try to predict when crashes will happen. They simply maintain a permanent defensive position, keeping a portion of their assets in cash or equivalents, knowing that eventually an opportunity will present itself. This approach feels painfully slow during long bull markets. Watching everyone else make money while you're sitting on cash is its own kind of torture. But when the crash comes, and it always comes, that patience transforms into purchasing power at exactly the right moment. Let's talk about the people who actually did this, not theoretical investors, but real humans who turned economic disasters into generational wealth. John Paulson was a relatively unknown hedge fund manager before the housing crisis. While almost everyone on Wall Street was celebrating the real estate boom, Paulson became convinced that the whole thing was built on garbage loans that would eventually default. He didn't just sit on the sidelines waiting. He actively bet against mortgage-backed securities, which are essentially bundles of home loans packaged together and sold as investments. When the housing market collapsed, Paulson's fund made $15 billion in a single year. $15 billion. He personally took home nearly $4 billion. That's not a typo. One person, one crisis, $4 billion in profit. Now, most people can't execute trades like Paulson did. That requires institutional access, enormous capital, and a level of financial sophistication that takes decades to develop. But the principle underneath his success is accessible to anyone. He identified an asset class that was overvalued. He maintained the conviction to bet against popular opinion, and he had the resources ready to deploy when his thesis proved correct. Scale that down to an individual level, and the same logic applies to buying undervalued stocks, distressed real estate, or struggling businesses. Speaking of real estate, some of the most straightforward crash-to-wealth stories come from people who simply bought properties when everyone else was terrified of them. After the housing crisis, entire neighborhoods in cities like Phoenix, Las Vegas, and Miami were filled with foreclosed homes selling for fractions of their previous values. Institutional investors scooped up thousands of these properties, sure, but so did individual buyers who recognized that people would always need places to live, that populations would continue growing, and that well-located real estate would eventually recover its value. Many of those buyers became millionaires within a decade, not through any genius insight, but through the simple willingness to buy when buying felt dangerous. The pandemic crash of early 2020 created its own class of winners. When markets dropped 30% in a matter of weeks, the instinct for most people was to sell everything and hide in cash. Some did the opposite. They recognized that a virus, however terrible, was a temporary disruption to an economy that would eventually reopen. Companies like Amazon, Zoom, and various pharmaceutical firms saw their stock prices multiply several times over within months. Even boring index funds, which just track the overall market, doubled in value for anyone who bought near the bottom and held on. But here's what separates the people who consistently profit from crashes and the people who get lucky once. The consistent winners treat crash preparation as an ongoing discipline, not a one-time event. They're building their positions during the good years, so they're ready for the bad ones. This means living below their means even when they could afford more. It means keeping emergency funds that cover not just personal expenses, but investment opportunities. It means continuously educating themselves about different asset classes so they can recognize value when it appears. The mistakes people make during crashes are almost as predictable as the crashes themselves. The first and most common is panic selling. When markets drop 20 or 30%, the pain feels unbearable. The temptation to stop the bleeding by selling everything is overwhelming. But selling during a crash locks in losses that might otherwise be temporary. Unless someone absolutely needs the money for immediate survival, selling at the bottom is usually the worst possible financial decision. The second mistake is trying to time the exact bottom. People wait for some signal that the crash is over, some confirmation that it's safe to buy again. The problem is that by the time safety is obvious, prices have already recovered significantly. The best buying opportunities feel terrifying at the moment of purchase. Waiting for comfort means missing the opportunity entirely. The third mistake is going all in too early. Crashes often happen in stages. Markets might drop 15%, recover a bit, then drop another 20%. Someone who deploys all their cash after the first drop finds themselves with no ammunition for the second. Smart crash investors scale into positions gradually, buying more as prices fall further, rather than betting everything on a single moment. The fourth mistake is buying garbage just because it's cheap. Not every beaten-down asset recovers. Some companies go bankrupt. Some real estate markets take decades to bounce back. Some businesses are disrupted by technology and never return to relevance. The key is buying quality assets at discounted prices, not just anything with a reduced price tag. A 50% discount on something worthless is still worthless. So what does practical preparation actually look like for someone watching this right now? The foundation is financial resilience. That means eliminating high-interest debt, because debt payments force you to keep earning regardless of opportunities that arise. It means building a cash reserve, and while traditional advice suggests 3 to 6 months of expenses, serious crash preparation might call for 12 months or more. It means developing multiple income streams, because job security evaporates during recessions and having alternative ways to earn provides both safety and capital. Beyond personal finances, preparation means education, understanding how different asset classes behave during downturns, learning to read basic financial statements so you can identify healthy companies trading at depressed prices, studying previous crashes to recognize the patterns of fear and recovery. This knowledge doesn't require a finance degree. It requires curiosity and consistent effort over time. Perhaps most importantly, preparation means psychological conditioning. Training yourself to view crashes as opportunities requires rewiring instincts that evolved over millions of years. Some people do this through meditation or mindfulness practices that help them observe their emotions without being controlled by them. Others create systematic rules that remove decision-making from the moment of panic. Still others find accountability partners who can talk them off the ledge when fear takes over. Whatever the method, the goal is the same: developing the ability to act rationally when everyone around you is acting emotionally. There's one more thing worth addressing. Some people hear all this and feel despair because they don't currently have the resources to take advantage of a crash. They're living paycheck to paycheck, struggling with debt, nowhere near having investment capital. If that's the situation, the goal isn't to feel bad about missing opportunities. The goal is to start building toward readiness for the next cycle. Crashes happen roughly every 7 to 10 years on average. Someone who starts preparing today, even from zero, can be ready for the next one. The wealth transfer will happen again. It always does. The only question is which side of that transfer you'll be on. The conclusion is simple but worth stating directly. Economic crashes are not random acts of destruction. They're predictable wealth redistribution events that favor the prepared over the panicked. Every major downturn in history has created a new generation of millionaires, people who bought what others were desperate to sell. Understanding this pattern won't prevent crashes from being painful, but it might just put you in a position to emerge from the next one wealthier than you went in.